And I am sharing my screen with you. All right, so you guys should be able to see my screen right now. And it should say Pecos Bill right up here, okay? All right, so like I said last week, we're going to be focusing on tall tales this week. So we are going to be reading Pecos Bill, and it is another American tall tale. So remember we said tall tales have a lot of exaggerations in them. So last week we talked about Sally Ann, Thunder Ann, Whirlwind, and her strength was exaggerated a lot. So today we're going to talk about Pecos Bill, and I want you to listen and see if you hear any exaggerations or any characteristics of tall tales while we're reading through. And it's kind of long, but hang in there with me and we'll get through it together, okay? All right, so Pecos Bill, and the first thing we're going to read about is some notes on this story. So remember we talked about how tall tales are told over and over and over again? That's what these notes kind of go over, okay? It says, yarns about Pecos Bill, the greatest cowpuncher ever known on either side of the Rockies from Texas through Montana and on into Canada, first appeared in 1923 Century magazine. 1923 is a long time ago, right? The author of the piece, Edward O'Reilly, wrote the saga of Pecos Bill by combining a number of Western folklore episodes with the boastful comic tall tale language of heroes such as Davy Crockett and Paul Bunyan. Those are probably two people you guys have heard of from stories that you probably read, probably in other grades as well. After O'Reilly invented the character of Pecos Bill, many others revised and expanded upon the yarns in dozens of books, articles, poems, recordings, and plays. So it says upon the yarns right here, and what he's talking about, think about like a yarn of string. It just kind of unravels and unravels. So what he's referring to here is the story of Pecos Bill, how it just like unravels and keeps going like a string of yarn. So you can kind of think of it that way. Pecos Bill seemed to capture the spirit of an earlier America, wild, untamed, and unsocialized. He even added an occasional note of his own brand of recklessness to stories about other tall tale characters as well. In an original Feebledson story, Feebled and Pecos Bill have a shootout. And in a Paul Bunyan anthology, an anthology is like a collection of stories, Pecos Bill teaches Paul how to ride a streak of lightning. This tale about Pecos Bill was derived, or it came from, the O'Reilly saga, as well as a number of other retellings. Okay, so that's some notes. This story is like a collection of other stories that have already been told, okay? All right, and whenever it says a saga up here, a saga, like we said, is like kind of like an anthology. It is like a collection of stories, okay? All right, so remember we said how things can be exaggerated in tall tales. So one example of that would be Pecos Bill teaches Paul Bunyan how to ride a streak of lightning. Okay, do you think that a person could really ride a streak of lightning? No. Okay, so that's an exaggeration of something that Pecos Bill taught someone how to do, is ride a streak of lightning. All right, so let's get into the story. You'll see here we have some wolves, right? But here's a person, and that person is going to be Pecos Bill. So this looks kind of silly, right? So let's find out how Pecos Bill got to hang out with all these wolves, right? All right. Ask any coyote near the Pecos River in western Texas who was the best cowboy who ever lived, and he'll throw back his head and howl, "Ow!" If you didn't know already, that's coyote language for Pecos Bill. When Pecos Bill was a little baby, he was as tough as a pine knot. He teethed on horseshoes instead of teething rings and played with grizzly bears instead of teddy bears. He could have grown up just fine in the untamed land of eastern Texas, but one day his pappy ran in from the fields hollering, "Pack up, Ma, neighbors moving in 50 miles away. It's getting too crowded." Before sundown, Bill's folks loaded their 15 kids and all their belongings in their covered wagon and started west. Does that sound familiar? A covered wagon and going west? Yeah, that should sound pretty familiar, right, from our westward expansion? As they clattered across the desolate land of western Texas, the crushing heat nearly drove them all crazy. Baby Bill got so hot and cross that he began to wallop his big brothers. Wallop means like punch them. Pretty soon, all 15 kids were going at one another tooth and nail. Before they turned each other into catfish bait, Bill fell out of the wagon and landed kerplop on the sun-scorched desert. The others were so busy fighting that they didn't even notice the baby was missing until it was too late to do anything about it. Well, tough little Bill just sat there in the dirt, watching his family rattle off in a cloud of dust until an old coyote walked over and sniffed him. "Goo goo," Bill said. Now, it's an amazing coincidence, but goo goo happens to mean something similar to glad to meet you in coyote language. Naturally, the old coyote figured he'd come across one of his own kind. He gave Bill a big lick and picked him up by the scruff of the neck and carried him home to his den. Bill soon discovered the coyote's kinfolk were about the wildest, roughest bunch you could imagine. Before he knew it, he was roaming the prairies with the pack. He howled at the moon, sniffed the brush, and chased lizards across the sand. He was having such a good time, scuttling about naked and dirty on all fours, that he completely forgot what it was like to be a human. So, now do you see how he ended up being with the coyotes? He fell out of that wagon as a baby, and the coyotes raised him. Let's see. Pecos Bill's coyote days came to an end about 17 years later. So he was with the coyotes for 17 years. One evening, as he was sniffing the sagebrush, a cowpoke came loping by on a big horse. "Hey you," he shouted. "What in the world are you?" Bill sat on his haunches and stared at the feller. "What are you?" asked the cowpoke again. "Varmint," Bill said hoarsely, for he hadn't used his human voice in 17 years. "No, you ain't." "Yeah, I am. I got fleas, don't I?" "Well, that don't mean nothing. A lot of Texans got fleas. The thing Varmint's got that you ain't got is a tail." "Oh, yes, I do have a tail," said Pecos Bill. "Let me see it then," said the cowpoke. Bill turned around to look at his rear end, and for the first time in his life, he realized he didn't have a tail. "Dang," he said, "but if I'm not a varmint, what am I?" "You're a cowboy, so start acting like one." Bill just growled at the feller like any coyote worth his salt would, but deep down in his heart of hearts, he knew the cowpoke was right. For the last 17 years, he'd had a sneaking suspicion that he was different from the pack of coyotes. For one thing, none of them seemed to smell quite as bad as he did. So with a heavy heart, he said goodbye to his four-legged friends and took off with the cowpoke for the nearest ranch. All right, let's check in. Does anybody have any questions before we keep going? Anybody? Okay, we're all good? All right, let's keep going. Acting like a human wasn't all that easy for Pecos Bill. Even though he soon started dressing right, he never bothered to shave or comb his hair. He'd just throw some water on his face in the morning and go around the rest of the day looking like a wet dog. Ignorant cowpokes claimed Bill wasn't too smart. Some of the meaner ones liked to joke that he wore a $10 hat on a 5-cent head. The truth was, Pecos Bill would soon prove to be one of the greatest cowboys who ever lived. He just needed to find the kind of folks who'd appreciate him. One night, when he was licking his dinner plate, his ears perked up. A couple of ranch hands were going on about a gang of wild cowboys. "Yep, those fellas were more animal than human," one ranch hand was saying. "Yep, them's the toughest bunch I ever came across. Heck, they're so tough they can kick fire out of flint rock with their bare toes. Yep, and they like to bite nails in half for fun." You really think someone could bite a nail in half? Not like your fingernail, like a nail that you would hammer into a board. It seems pretty impossible, huh? Who are these fellers? Asked Bill. The Hell's Gate gang, said the ranch hand. The mangiest, meanest, most low-down bunch of low-life varmints that ever grew hair. Sounds like my kind of folks, said Bill. And before anyone could holler whoa, he jumped on his horse and took off for Hell's Gate Canyon. So you see Bill getting on his horse right here, about to ride off. Bill hadn't gone far when disaster struck. His horse stepped in a hole and broke his ankle. Dang, said Bill as he stumbled up from the spill. He draped the lame critter, his horse, around his neck and hurried on. So right now he's carrying his horse around his neck. After he'd walked about 100 more miles, Bill heard some mean rattling. Then a 50-foot rattlesnake reared up its ugly head and stuck out its long, forked tongue, ready to fight. Knock it off, you scaly-hided fool. I'm in a hurry, Bill said. The snake didn't give a spit for Bill's plans. He just rattled on. Before the cussed varmint could strike, Bill had no choice but to knock him cross-eyed. Hey, feller, he said, holding up the dazed snake. I like your spunk. Come go with us. Then he wrapped the rattler around his arm and continued on his way. So right now he's got his horse around his neck and a rattlesnake wrapped around his arm. After Bill had hiked another 100 miles with his horse around his neck and his snake around his arm, he heard a terrible growl. A huge mountain lion was crouching on a cliff, getting ready to leap on top of him. Don't jump, you mangy bobtailed flea bag, Bill said. Well, call any mountain lion a mangy bobtailed flea bag, and he'll jump on your back for sure. After this one leaped onto Bill, so much fur began to fly that it darkened the sky. Bill wrestled that mountain lion into a headlock and then squeezed him so tight that the big cat had to cry uncle. When the embarrassed old critter started to slink off, Bill felt sorry for him. Aw, come on, you big silly, he said. You're more like me than most humans I meet. He saddled up the cat, jumped on his back, and the four of them headed for the canyon, with the mountain lion screeching, the horse neighing, and the rattler rattling, and Pecos Bill hollering a wild war whoop. All right, so here we have Bill. See the rattlesnake wrapped around his arm. He's got his horse around his neck. And look here, what's he riding on? You remember? He's riding that bobcat, right? So Bill is on a crazy adventure. When the Hell's Gate gang heard these noises coming from the prairie, they nearly fainted. They dropped their dinner plates and their faces turned as white as bleached desert bones. Their knees knocked and their 6 guns shook. Hey there, Bill said as he sidled up to their campfire grinning. Who's the boss around here? A 9-foot feller with 10 pistols at his side stepped forward and in a shaky voice said, Stranger I was, but from now on, it'll be you. Well, thank you, partner, said Bill. Get on with your dinner, boys. Don't let me interrupt. Once Bill settled down with the Hell's Gate gang, his true genius revealed itself. With the gang's help, he put together the biggest ranch in the Southwest. He used New Mexico as a corral and Arizona as a pasture. So New Mexico and Arizona are both what? These are both states. So he made the biggest ranch. He was using a whole state as a corral to hold his horses. And then Arizona as a pasture, and that's where the horses go out and they can eat grass and graze. He invented tarantulas and scorpions as practical jokes. Do you think he really invented tarantulas and scorpions? Probably not, right? He also invented roping. Some say his rope was exactly as long as the equator. Others argue it was 2 feet shorter. Things were going fine for Bill until Texas began to suffer the worst drought in its history. So a drought is when there's no rain. It was so dry that all the rivers turned as powdery as biscuit flour. The parched grass was catching fire everywhere. For a while, Bill and his gang managed to lasso water from the Rio Grande. When the river dried up, they lassoed water from the Gulf of Mexico. No matter what he did, though, Bill couldn't get enough water to stay ahead of the drought. All his horses and cows were starting to dry up and blow away like balls of tumbleweed. It was horrible. Just when the end seemed near, the sky turned a deep shade of purple. From the distant mountains came a terrible roar. The cattle began to stampede, and a huge black funnel of a cyclone appeared, heading straight for Bill's ranch. The rest of the Hell's Gate gang shouted help and ran, but Pecos Bill wasn't scared in the least. Yahoo, he hollered, and he swung his lariat and lassoed the cyclone around its neck. Bill held on tight as he got sucked up in the middle of the swirling cloud. He grabbed the cyclone by the ears and pulled himself onto her back. Then he let out a whoop and headed that twister across Texas. The mighty cyclone bucked, arched, and screamed like a wild bronco. But Pecos Bill just held on with his legs and used his strong hands to wring the rain out of her wind. He wrung that rain and flooded Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona until finally he slid off the shriveled up funnel and fell into California. The earth sank about 200 feet below sea level in the spot where Bill landed, creating the area known today as Death Valley. There, that little watering should hold things for a while, he said, brushing himself off. After his cyclone ride, no horse was too wild for Pecos Bill. He soon found a young colt that was as tough as a tiger and as crazy as a streak of lightning. He named the colt Widowmaker and raised him on a barbed wire and dynamite. Whenever the two rode together, they backflipped and somersaulted all over Texas, loving every minute of it. One day, when Bill and Widowmaker were bouncing around the Pecos River, they came across an awesome sight. A wild-looking, red-haired woman riding on the back of the biggest catfish Bill had ever seen. The woman looked like she was having a ball, screeching, "Ride 'em, cowgirl," as the catfish whipped her around in the air. "What's your name?" Bill shouted. "Slewfoot Sue. What's it to you?" she said. Then she war-whooped away over the windy water. Thereafter, all Pecos Bill could think of was Slewfoot Sue. He spent more and more time away from the Hell's Gate gang as he wandered the barren cattle lands looking for her. When he finally found her lonely little cabin, he was so love-struck that he reverted to some of his old coyote ways. He sat on his haunches in the moonlight and began a howling and a hooing. Well, the good news was that Sue had a bit of coyote in her too, so she completely understood Bill's language. She stuck her head out of the window and ah-hooed back to him as that she loved him too. Consequently, Bill and Sue decided to get married. On the day of the wedding, Sue wore a beautiful white dress with steel spring bustle, and Bill appeared in an elegant buckskin suit. But after a lovely ceremony, a terrible catastrophe occurred. Slewfoot Sue got it into her head that she just had to have a ride on Bill's wild bronco, Widowmaker. "You can't do that, honey," Bill said. "He won't let any human toss a leg over him but me." "Don't worry," said Sue. "You know I can ride anything on 4 legs, not to mention what flies or swims." Bill tried his best to talk Sue out of it, but she wouldn't listen. She was dying to buck on the back of that bronco. Wearing her white wedding dress with the bustle, she jumped on Widowmaker and kicked him with her spurs. Well, that bronco didn't need any thorns in his side to start bucking to beat the band. He bounded up in the air with such amazing force that suddenly Sue was flying high into the Texas sky. She flew over plains and mesas, over canyons, deserts, and prairies. She flew so high that she looped over the new moon and fell back to Earth. You think anyone could really go up so high that they would fly over the moon and back to Earth? No. So that's another example of an exaggeration, right? But when Sue landed on her steel spring bustle, she rebounded right back into the heavens. As she bounced back and forth between heaven and earth, Bill whirled his lariat above his head, then lassoed her. But instead of bringing Sue back down to earth, he got yanked into the night sky alongside her. Together, Pecos Bill and Slewfoot Sue bounced off the earth and went flying to the moon. And at that point, Bill must have gotten some sort of foothold in a moon crater, because neither he nor Sue returned to Earth. Not ever. Folks figure those two must have dug their boot heels into some moon cheese and raised a pack of wild coyotes just like themselves. Texans will tell you that every time you hear thunder rolling over the desolate land near the Pecos River, that's just Bill's family having a good laugh upstairs. When you hear a strange yahooing in the dark night, don't be fooled. That's the sound of Bill howling on the moon instead of at it. And when the lights flash across the midnight sky, you can bet it's Bill and Sue riding the backs of some white-hot shooting stars. All right, so that is the tale of Pecos Bill. So remember, you will have your questions, and there's 9 of them this time for Pecos Bill. So I already posted, if you've been on Google Classroom this morning, you've seen where I posted the questions for you. So here's our Google Classroom for my homeroom. They're posted here. So remember, if you click on them, you can answer them in Edulastic. And then tomorrow I will post the other 4 questions. Wednesday will be vocabulary, and then Thursday and Friday we'll do some writing. So you have a lot more vocabulary words than you had last week, so make sure you're paying attention to those. And then also, remember last week in Sally Ann, we had the definitions for the vocabulary words were kind of on the side. Notice you don't have that help this time, so you're going to have to use your skills to look up your definitions online the best you can, okay? And I have faith in you guys that you can do that. So let's go back really quick. Anybody have any questions about Pecos Bill before we move on? Anybody? Nope, no questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay, all right, so if you look in your Google Classroom, you'll also see I posted some brain pop stuff. So there's one today about Lewis and Clark, and then on Wednesday there will be another one. And these kind of go along with what we're learning about Pecos Bill. We talked about westward expansion, and you know that Lewis and Clark went out to explore the West, right? So there's Brain Pop assignment on there, and you should be able to sign in to Brain Pop using your regular login information. So if you click on this, it might ask you to log in. You can log in through Clever as well, okay? And then don't forget to be completing your Edulastic stuff, and if you've already completed it, you can go into Edulastic and you can see where I graded it, and I gave you feedback on that. And I'm working on, if I didn't grade it yet, I'm finishing it up today and tomorrow for your writing assignments, okay? All right, so does anybody else have any other questions or anything else before we end our lesson and I stop recording?
Is Miss Dunn gonna be tomorrow?
Yep, Miss Dunn will be on tomorrow at 10. And then you'll have me again on Wednesday, and then Miss Dunn will have Thursday again. Okay? Anything else? All right. Don't forget to use your library code that Miss Andre posted to get into your library class at noon, so you'll have some fun stuff in there from her. Miss Andre, you have anything else before we leave?
No, but I did enjoy listening to the story, and if y'all are interested in more tall tales, we can talk about how to find ebooks with tall tales when you come to the library today.
Oh yeah, that would be great. You guys definitely should read about Paul Bunyan, because he's not in our list, and I think that you guys would really like Paul Bunyan. It's a fun tale, and he has a big blue ox. And I can't remember
Oh,
the ox's name right
yes.
now, but he has a really cool big blue ox that I think you guys would love.
Where we gonna go to get to the library code? I mean, to the library.
Where do you, like, how do you join the library class?
Yeah, where is that?
Okay, let me show you. All right, I'm gonna go, let's see, if I go to Google Classroom, I'm trying to see how I can do it. If I go here, okay. So if you click your little waffle thing up here and you go to your classroom, you'll see these are all the classes that I am in, but if you click this little plus sign right here, you'll see join a class, and that class code that Miss Andre put right there, you'll type that in right here and then click join, and it'll add you to the library class. Does that help?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, awesome. Anything else?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Well, if y'all need us, we are here for you. Let us know what we can do, how we can help, and we're all here. All right. So let's see. How do I stop this recording? I don't know. All right.